Last year, I made a video about whether or not you should buy a rental property in Oregon. Now, if you're on the fence about buying in Oregon versus another state, you should go ahead and check out that video first. In this video, I'm going to be covering the most important things you need to know before buying a rental property in Oregon. Now, I can't say it's everything you need to know, but if you're a new investor or you're investing in Oregon for the first time, this video is going to help point you in the right direction. I'll cover things like what to expect for cash flow versus appreciation, expenses, the numbers you need to know, what different terms mean. I'll go over location, tenant-landlord laws, and things like that. So there's a lot that we're going to cover. So let's go ahead and get started. Funny t-shirt that says, sure, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? Now, I, on the other hand, only care about what works in practice. Theory is great, but if it doesn't hold up to practice and working every single day, it's not really worth considering. I've heard all kinds of different theories about what works in real estate and what people should do, and never buy a rental property or investment property with your own money. And sure, these things may be great theories, but in practice, often they just don't work out super well. Now, if that's the path you want to take, go ahead. There's 100 other videos for you to watch, but what I'm going to be sharing is what I've seen work for multiple investor clients that I've helped buy their first or second or third investment properties. I know that what I'm sharing is going to work for you just the same as it worked for them. And as we're about to find out, there's some things that work a little bit differently in Oregon than in other parts of the country. So with that, let's go ahead and get on with the rest of the video. The very first thing you need to know about investing in Oregon is that Oregon is not a cash flow state. It's an appreciation state. Now, this is a really important distinction, and it means if you're investing in Oregon, your focus needs to be on the gain you're getting in equity more than what cash flow you're bringing in on a monthly basis. All right, let's look at some numbers. So Oregon, on average, for the past 60 years, has gone up in appreciation. So property values have gone up 5 to 6% per year. Now, this is average. In the last couple of years, we've seen property values go up a lot less than that. In some areas, they've even gone down. So just keep in mind, this is an average over the past 60 years. And looking forward, that number is probably going to be the same, around 5 to 6%. Now, here's why that number is a big deal. So say you've got $125,000 that you're investing into a $500,000 property. That's 25% down. Now, if that $500,000 property goes up 5% in value, it now becomes a $525,000 property. Now, if your property goes up 5%, what is your return on investment? Well, it's not 5%. You invested $125,000, which now with that added $25,000, that $125,000 becomes $155,000. And that's actually a 20% return on investment. There's not really another legal way that you can consistently and predictably invest where you can get a 20% annual return on your investment. Now, in many ways, that is an oversimplification because there's a lot that goes into managing properties and rentals and other expenses. And there's also costs if you later decide to sell the property, there's property taxes. So I get that. But here's the main point is that there's not really a much better way to increase your net worth than by investing in real estate. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. I know there's a lot of other expenses. In fact, I'm going to talk about expenses right now. So I know I said Oregon is not a cash flow state, but it's still really important to know if you're going to cash flow. You really don't want to be cash flow negative because even if your equity is going up, you're not seeing that money in your hands. You're not seeing that in your bank account. So if you're having to pay every month, that can begin to be uncomfortable. Now, some people still decide to do this, just like they still decide to invest in their 401ks and Roth IRAs and whatever. They know that that's money that they're investing that is going to grow. Real estate is kind of similar, but it's just a lot more dynamic when you factor in all the different income and outgoing costs and things like that. So when you're looking at whether your property cash flows and how good of a deal it is, there's a couple numbers to be aware of. The first one I'm going to talk about is gross rent multiplier, or GRM. So what is the gross rent multiplier? Well, it's the property value divided by your total annual gross rent. So say, for example, you've got $500,000 property, it brings in $2,500 per month. That's $30,000 per year. So 500,000 divided by 30,000 is about 16.7. And for single family homes in Oregon, that is fairly typical. A $400,000 that rents at $2,000 per month is going to give you the same number. Now, if you've looked into investing before, you might have heard of something called the 1% rule. The 1% rule essentially says that your monthly rent should equal 1% of the property value. That would mean that on a $500,000 property, you would get $5,000 per month. If you're interested in knowing what the gross rent multiplier is, that is about 8.3, exactly half of the number I mentioned, 16.7. So just know that in Oregon, that doesn't really happen. You're not going to see a single family property running at $5,000 if it only costs $500,000. Here in Oregon, it's more like the 0.5% rule. So your monthly rent should be about 0.5% of the property value. All right, the next number to be aware of is the cap rate. So the cap rate is your annual net operating income divided by your property value. Now, because the cap rate takes into account your net operating income and not just your gross rent, it's looking at things like vacancy and other expenses, so it gives you a better idea of what you're actually going to get as a return on your investment. And that brings us up to the next point, which is knowing what your expenses are. Now, there's a lot to this. Expenses for a rental property really depend on the type of property you're getting and whether or not you have a loan, whether or not you're using property management. Whatever you're doing, it's important to know what these costs are. There's also ongoing maintenance costs. There's costs associated with vacancy. So there's a lot more that I can go into detail here, but the point is you really need to take a look at what your numbers are and be sure that you know these numbers when you're buying a specific property. The worst thing is when you go into a property and you have one set of numbers and you think you're going to be profitable, and all of a sudden you find out that your expenses are way more than you anticipated, and all of a sudden your home becomes a money pit. This is part of why it's important to have a really good team of a real estate agent, a lender, a property manager who all really know what they're talking about and can assist you with this. If you're buying in Oregon and don't already have this team set up, I'd be happy to make those introductions. Also, financial advisors and CPAs can really be helpful during this process. All right, next, if you're buying a rental property in Oregon, you really want to know, are you looking at buying a long-term rental or a short-term rental? So are you looking at getting a tenant that's going to be paying you monthly, that's there for maybe years? Or are you looking at just like a vacation rental where it's going to be very sporadic and you'll have people in and out all the time? Whichever type of property you decide to get, it's going to have a big impact on what your expenses are, how involved you'll be with the property, the type of property you might want to be looking at, as well as the location. So there's a lot of different factors. They're two very different types of investing, and it's important to know what you're interested in doing. Now, if you're seriously considering investing, you probably have an idea of which direction you're leaning. But if you have questions about this, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. Newberg, where I live, is one of the popular locations for short-term rentals for people looking to tour Oregon wine country. There's hundreds of vineyards and wineries right around here, so a lot of people are looking at Newberg because the property values are fairly affordable. It's close to Portland, it's close to a lot of great things. So a lot of people are looking for short-term rentals here. It's also a great location for long-term rentals because property values are more affordable than those closer to Portland. So a lot of people will come to Newberg and then commute to wherever else they need to go. If you're not quite sure on location, I do serve a pretty wide radius around Newberg, really most of the southwest Portland area. So feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions about any of this. Now, speaking of location is one of the other things to consider. Like I said, I focus on Newberg, greater southwest Portland area, and depending on what you're looking for, the location is going to be a really big factor. Location matters even down to the specific neighborhood and maybe even the specific street that you're looking at. For example, while you should never discriminate against any type of demographic, say you're looking at really focusing on families. You want a family to move into your home. Well, you should probably think about, is it close to a playground? How's the walkability? Are there busy streets? What are the schools nearby like? So these are all things that you should think about. The dynamics of a neighborhood is really important. You can have a property that's just a few blocks down that looks like it's a great property, but if the neighborhood isn't great, or maybe there's a lot of multifamily right there, or there's a really busy street, it might not be super attractive to the type of renter you're looking for. Another example is if you're wanting to rent to an executive, maybe you should look at somewhere like right by Intel or Nike. Either way, all of these things are really important factors to consider. If you're looking at renting in Oregon and you're trying to figure out what kind of client you should be looking at, again, that would be a great conversation for us to have. I could help walk you through a few different scenarios and help you decide on what type of person you want to rent to, what type of property you should probably be looking for. But no matter where you're looking, maybe you're looking in Bend or another part of Oregon, it's really important to have a real estate agent who knows the market and can give you really good counsel. The next factor I'm going to talk about is Oregon landlord-tenant law. So Oregon is pretty skewed in favor of tenants. There's a lot of people who won't invest in Oregon specifically because of the Oregon tenant-landlord laws. Now, there's a whole argument about if the laws are so strict, is it pushing landlords away and therefore making properties more expensive? It's kind of a double-edged sword, but without getting into the politics of it, it's just important to know what the laws are. For example, you need to know timelines related to evictions. You need to know about rent increase limits. And you need to know how the rules change whether you own a lot of properties or only a couple properties, because the rules are even more strict the more properties that you own. Also, if you're in Portland itself, there's even more strict tenant-landlord laws. And I highly encourage you to familiarize yourself with the law, potentially even get an attorney involved if you're not using a property management company so that you can have your bases covered. One important thing I will mention about Oregon if you're an investor somewhere else is that you can only raise rent once every 12 months. So if you're looking at a property and you think, oh, well, I'll just buy this property below market value and raise these below market rents up to current, you can't really do that. You can only raise rents a certain amount and you can only do it once a year. So it's just something you have to consider, and you can't just evict the person either, especially if they've been there for more than 12 months. So there's a lot of those little things that you might not think about. Again, this is why it's really important to have someone who knows the investment process, and again, potentially get a property manager or an attorney involved to help give you advice along the way. All right, the last thing I'm going to mention is that if you're buying in Oregon for the first time, but maybe you're selling a property somewhere else, you really need to know about 1031 exchanges if you haven't already looked into this. Essentially, a 1031 exchange allows you to exchange an investment property, and instead of paying your capital gains tax, you can roll that investment into a new property. This is really important because otherwise you may be on the hook for paying a whole lot of money when you sell that investment property. Now, there's a lot of strict rules and timelines with 1031 exchanges. You have to have a qualified intermediary. Again, there's a lot that goes into it. The main thing you need to know is that you have to start this process before you sell your existing property. So if you are doing that, if you're looking at doing a 1031 exchange, or maybe you're not quite sure how it works, but you think it might be the right option, definitely reach out to me. I can connect you with a qualified intermediary or exchange professional. They can help walk you through the process. All right, so what do you think? Are you interested in buying a rental property in Oregon? Are there factors that I left out that you think are worth mentioning? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. And if you are interested in investing specifically in Newberg, my whole channel is about Newberg and other real estate topics. And there's a couple of other videos that you can check out that are popping up right now. You can also subscribe to this channel to get more information like this. Well, thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next video.